Yeah, welcome to today's Condors Talk. It's hosted by the Friends of California Condors, Wild and Free. Our mission is to enhance public awareness of California condors and to ensure that they're protected, healthy, and free. We are incredibly pleased to have Daniel Cook from the Fish and Wildlife, Molly Estelle from Fish and Wildlife, and Nadia Seal-Faith from Santa Barbara Zoo here to give us an update and answer all of your questions. Daniel Cook is the park ranger for Hopper Mountain National Wildlife Refuge Complex. His job focuses on public engagement, especially with students. He shares the story of the California condor and helps ensure its recovery. Friends of Condors have been lucky enough to work with him on many outreach projects, and we have always been impressed with his ability to engage young people with the condor story. Molly Estelle is a wildlife biologist for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and she's the team lead for the Southern California Condor Field Operations. Her job currently is to coordinate the field team and work with partner organizations in an effort to recover the species. But she's been with the program for 10 years and has been lucky enough to focus on several aspects of its field work. Nadia Seal-Faith grew up fascinated with animals of all shapes and sizes. She first joined the Santa Barbara Zoo team as a keeper aid volunteer and is now the conservation and science associate. As a new mother, she's excited to be able to work on field conservation programs such as the California Condor Recovery Program, Island Fox Recovery and Monitoring Efforts, California Red-Legged Frog Translocation in the Santa Monica Mountains, the Western Monarch Overwintering Counts, and other habitat restoration programs. Projects that Nadia is also projects that also focus on the preservation of species and habitats for future generations, like her son Colt. Nadia is also passionate about the development of cooperative relationships between conservation efforts and industries, such as the one that formed between the California Condor Recovery Program and a local oil production company, Seneca Resources. So with that, I'm really excited to hand it over to Daniel Cook for his presentation on the California condor.
Thank you, Helen, for that introduction. I'm really excited to be here digitally with everybody together and to be able to talk about these magnificent birds, their story, and how we can engage to continue their recovery efforts. So welcome. Today we are going to be talking about Gymnogyps californianus, that is the California condor, and we're going to be focusing on the Southern California flock, which is almost 100 birds that is managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in partnership with the Santa Barbara Zoo. And our flock can be found here in Southern California, over about 10,000 square miles of their range. So you can see here, it's they tend to stick over the mountains that you can see, and this is actually GPS data from one bird, 785, a few years ago, that made this flight over the course of 3 weeks. So this range is huge. Our refuges are just dots on the map down here, and these birds use their entire range as individuals and sort of move about in it pretty fantastically. So this is the flock we're talking about. There's another flock of about 100 in Central California, another flock around 90 that is in Arizona, Utah, and another flock of about 40 in Baja, Mexico. So continuing on, we're going to go over a few quick facts about the California condor before we get into its story. They are a New World vulture. There's 8 species in that family, I believe, and they are the second largest in that family. They are just shy of the Andean condor, which has a 10-foot wingspan. However, in North America, they are the largest soaring bird on land. And I actually have a feather here with me of a California condor, and this one feather is almost as long as my entire arm. And this is one of those primaries that you can see pointing out at the end of those wings there. And they can weigh up to 20 pounds. They're obligate scavengers. They can eat 20 to 25% of their body weight in a single day, in a single sitting, right? So those obligate scavengers are flying around cleaning up the environment of carrion, of carcasses, dead animals. One really interesting about condors, is that they don't hunt, right? They don't kill. They only feed on food that's already presented for them, and then they bring that around, those nutrients, they spread them around the environment. Yeah, they're our nature's cleanup crew, right? They've evolved these large wings to do that soaring, right? Looking for that food, since they can't provide their own. Their wings and their ability to soar like this is amazing feat of energy conservation. And all obligate scavengers in the world today are actually these large soaring birds like vultures. They reach sexual maturity around 5 to 6 years of age. That's when they get these white spots under their wings. Their head goes from black to that colorful, beautiful head you see here. And that's when they're mature enough, but sometimes that breeding doesn't happen right away. And there's always a lot of range with some of these things. Breeding pairs lay 1 egg per clutch and raise 1 chick per nesting attempt. Again, that's a range. We've seen quite a variety of behaviors there, especially in the captive breeding program that I'll mention later, but they're doing some really fantastic things that doesn't really line up with some of the normal ranges that we're seeing in the wild. Like usually they'll nest every other year. However, we have seen in the wild, 111 nested 13 years in a row. And in captivity, they're definitely doing more of that each year. And eggs take about 57 days to hatch. If you've ever watched our live streaming cameras, you might have followed along some of the growth of that chick to its fledgling stage, which takes about 6 months. And then usually about another year, they remain with their parents, learning to fly, learning where to forage and roost and things like that. We haven't seen a condor die from old age in the wild, but we expect them to live about 60 years, maybe a little longer. Topa Topa is the oldest living condor, and he's been living in captivity his whole life. He's 52, maybe 53, getting there, and still actively breeding. And yeah, so some quick facts about condors there. They also can fly over 200 miles in a day. Like that map we saw at the beginning, that was over 3,000 miles in 3 weeks. So just magnificent creatures that are just fascinating to watch, and they've been here a long time. Condors evolved during the Pleistocene epoch, right? Which was about 2.5 million years ago to 12,000 years before present. And condors had quite a larger range than what we see currently. And they have a lot of significance and input in a lot of different native cultures and traditions all along the West Coast. And down here in Southern California, in the Channel Islands, the Chumash actually have the oldest human remains in North America, out on Santa Rosa Island. They're dated about 15,000 years ago. And this is some rock art from the mainland of a condor done by the Chumash. And part of their origin story of migrating from the Channel Islands to the mainland involves the creation of condor from a different creature named Wet. And they actually, in their traditions and in their culture, they will pray to the condor, because condors can soar 15,000 feet in the air, and they can actually bring our messages to Hutash, which is the creator for the Chumash people, and get that message across. So humans have been engaging with condors for quite some time. In 1805, Lewis and Clark actually discovered California condors in Washington in the lower Columbia. And they made the first description by the European invaders at that time. And since then was the beginning of the end, or the demise for condors for quite a time. As Europeans came into the area with their technology of guns and ammo, they also brought in some materials within that, like lead, that ultimately led to some conflict with these birds. So we're going to watch a quick segment of this video. This is going to be Jan Hamber, who currently works with the Santa Barbara Natural History Museum. And this is from a video called the Condor Shadows. produced by Good Eye Films. And it's a little quiet, so just be prepared. You may have to turn your volume up and then turn it down when it's finished.
This is 1987, and by then there was only one wild California condor in the entire world. So I wrote. I've had it on my mind to write up the last days of wild condors for months, but somehow I couldn't do it. It is still painful for me to think about those huge wings held captive in a cage in LA and know that never again will I thrill to the sight of that majestic bird soaring for miles so effortlessly on the wind currents. On the morning of April 18th, 1987, I sat on my OP and followed AC-9 by telemetry signal as he left the roost on Brush Mountain and headed straight for Hudson Ranch. He went in, and as I was violently screaming at him to get out of the way, I saw a puff of smoke, and the net went over him just a foot or so away from freedom. For all the effort that had been expended, for all the plans that had been laid, for all the hopes that had been imagined, I just knew that I had been part of a historic moment, the purposeful removing of an endangered species from the wild to save it. And I put down my head on the steering wheel and cried.
Yeah, so that was Jan Hamber, and that was, can be a lot, you know, that was a very big time in conservation in general, not just for condors, but the world was really looking at that moment. And this is some best estimates as well in the early 40s and 60s there, but this shows that decline of condors that required us to take those last 27 wild birds out because they were just dying at such a rapid rate that to leave them in the wild pretty much guaranteed the complete extinction of the species. So we pulled all the birds out. The last one, as Jan was mentioning, that we saw in that video there was in 1987. And that was the start of the captive breeding program, and the California Condor Recovery Program was going off then. And for 5 years, there were no California condors in the wild. So we've seen the world extinct of condors, and we don't want to see that again. So we've been working, our biologists have been working with all of our partners to bring these numbers back up. So good news is we are coming back from the brink. California condors have been successfully breeding in captivity really well. They're breeding in the wild. Folks have been working really hard with reintroductions and that captive program to get these numbers up. And you can see we're over 500 in the world today. And that growth largely comes from the captive breeding program. So this purple section at the bottom is our captive program population. Not all of those birds are breeders that are there, but a lot of them are. And they've been working out some fascinating techniques in the captive breeding programs, especially the LA Zoo, where they can have condors double clutch. So they can take an egg, the condor will produce another one. They can raise one in the incubator. The condors can sit on the other. And just recently, in the past few years, they've actually been not just puppet rearing one chick and then having other condors raise, you know, the other egg, or having foster condors come in and help raise chicks, but they're giving multiple chicks to individual bird in the past, and also pairs now to raise more than one chick at a time. So that rate of growth is growing, which has been amazing, and it's a really tip of the hat to those programs, not just LA Zoo, but San Diego, Safari Park, Oregon Zoo, and World Center of Birds of Prey in Idaho. All of these programs have been working to make that growth that you see in the blue. Those are the birds that have been released from the captive program. And now that we've had more of those birds being released, you see that green section is those wild fledged. So that's 2 wild birds that mate, breed, and successfully have a chick. So that is growing as well. which is exciting to see. As our population grows, we have more opportunities for more birds to breed. And as our population grows up, we'll see in a second here that we have a lot of young birds that are getting ready to reach that sexual maturity age. And so with all of this growth, with all of this increase that we've been seeing, all of this success in breeding, it's kind of interesting to think, what is keeping these numbers down? Why aren't there, 1,000 condors in the world right now when we just had condor number 1,000, a chick that hatched at Angel's Landing in Zion National Park? Why aren't there that many living birds? And I got ahead of myself, I apologize. Before we get to that, I just wanted to give you guys a little fun evidence that captive breeding doesn't have any issues. And so we'll check out from the LA Zoo a quick little copulation of some condors. Yeah, they got no sweat making it happen in captivity for their species. So just a fun one for everybody there. And this is our Southern California population age and sex distribution. If you pay attention to some of those numbers there, you'll realize not every number 1 through 40 is represented. We don't have a bird at every age, but the focus here is these 5 and 6. I just wanted to highlight that, over the next few years, these birds are going to be entering into this breeding aged population. And that just means that the possibility for more nests and more condors is going to be there. So we asked ourselves, right, what was causing this decline? If we have so much success with breeding, what's taking those numbers down? And you might have seen a peek on that slide I went to, but the answer is very clear when we look at the studies. When we go out into the field and track condors that have died and bring those in and perform necropsies and identify that cause of death, it's staggering. It's really clear when you look at this chart. 50% of all those deaths with a known cause come from lead poisoning, and that's from us putting lead into the environment through the use of lead ammunition. And when these condors come to clean up after us and to scavenge and feed themselves and their chicks, they end up ingesting some of that lead. We'll see here how that happens is when lead impacts as a bullet, it's a soft metal and it breaks in fragments. So what we're seeing here, all these white specks, this is an x-ray of some ballistic gel that was shot. You can see that wound channel, that path that the bullet takes, kind of disappear quickly as this bullet spreads out. And we've measured these fragments, over 12 inches from this wound channel. So if you leave behind your gut pile or anything like that, these condors are really efficient scavengers. Like we said, they soar 200 miles a day. They got incredible eyesight, so they can spot, that carrion on the landscape. They can spot those other animals that are feeding on that, like crows or turkey vultures, and they can clean that up pretty quick. And when they ingest this, they have an adaptation inherent to many birds and scavengers of that higher pH in their stomach. So that could potentially be helping what was once an adaptation is now helping dissolve these heavy metals quicker. And that could be playing some effect. The physiology behind this is all being studied really closely by a few different folks, and like Myra Finkelstein, and it's still a big question in science that they're learning a lot more about, which is interesting, exactly how this works in the body. But the signs and symptoms, the mortality of condors is clear. And we're going to see another quick clip from the Condor Shadow. And it is going to be a little difficult to watch. It's going to show some bald eagles that are suffering from lead toxicosis. So if you don't want to see that, you can look away. It's not too long, but I just want to give you all a warning of that before we start this.
We have a national symbol, the bald eagle. Bald eagles, they can die all the time from lead poisoning. Golden eagles do, and any other wildlife are affected by these lead fragments that are left in gut piles and in carcasses that are wounded animals that are out there, or animals that are just shot as varmints, like ground squirrels. Condor is kind of like the canary in the mine. It's giving us, you know, some indication that lead isn't a good product to be putting out on the environment.
So it's the data is pretty clear that, you know, lead is the issue for California condors, and that source of that lead is from the ammunition. So I really want to highlight and focus that lead, plumbum, that chemical, that material, that metal is the issue. Lead is the problem. It's not the activities that bring that lead there. We highly encourage hunting, especially in Southern California. You know, you're providing a food source for California condors on the landscape when you're using non-lead ammunition and providing that clean, ethical kill for that condor. So we really want to promote the use of non-lead ammunition. And some of you may have been sitting there wondering how you can help, how you can get involved, what you can do. And the number one thing is get the lead out. We got to talk to people. We have to build relationships, encourage people, facilitate them getting non-lead ammunition. Chad Thomas and Mike Stake, whose information you see here, this is the most important part of our slide. Take down their information, screenshot it, write it down, save their numbers in their phones, save their emails. Because if you are a hunter or someone that uses lead ammunition on the landscape, or if you know somebody or friends or family, or you meet somebody that does, these two gentlemen will do whatever they can to ensure that they get non-lead ammunition. Mike Stake will drive all over, he drives all over California and will swap lead ammunition from you and give you non-lead ammunition. He's a licensed vendor. He can perform the background checks that are necessary by law to make those transactions. So please reach out to these people. Please share their information with folks you know, and try and build that that connection of shared values between folks that you might not identify that with right away. Because if we look back to the start of conservation with Theodore Roosevelt, he was a hunter, and that is what gave him that vision that we need to conserve these lands and that we do impact them, and that impact can be detrimental if we don't take the right steps, you know, of conservation. So we really want to couple that conservation and hunting heritage. It's really important that these groups come together more, because, you know, they go hand in hand. We both want future populations and habitats for use. So check those out, and then get involved with the youth, right? Our next generation is so important. Find people in your neighborhood. Shout out to Susan Gilland out there, who I saw is watching. She does young birders with the Pasadena Audubon, and that is amazing. Some of the students that she works with there are already superior scientists to so many professionals. They're incredible students, and they're gonna help change the world. So be a mentor like that. Seek out schools and those youth organizations. Check out our Condor Kids curriculum and website, and call your schools and let them know if you know that this curriculum's out there for 3rd grade and 7th grade, and you want your students learning it in their schools. Also, you know, keep sharing, keep advocating, keep coming to these webinars. Volunteer with the Friends group. They do so much for us. Right now, there's not a lot of opportunities because of the COVID pandemic that's going on. But in the future, there's definitely going to be opportunities for you to do some hands-on things to really help out. Yeah. And last little slide is just some contact info, some websites you can check out. And we are going to transition into the Q&A with Nadia Seal Faith from the Santa Barbara Zoo and Molly Estelle from the Fish and Wildlife Service, who are amazing, talented, super cool biologists that are going to answer all of your questions.
Thanks for that intro, Daniel.
And just a reminder for people, you can type your questions into the chat function. So that's at the bottom of desktop screens. It's the little voice bubble that says chat. Or if you're contacting us via a mobile phone, it's you click participants, and at the bottom of the participant list, you can type into chat. So I see the first one: what preys on condors? And wondering about the predation percentage. I think that was the percentage was on a slide.
Oh yeah, can we go back to that number, Daniel, if you have it handy? There we go. Yeah, luckily predation isn't too big of a threat to condors, which is great. But in the past, we've had bobcats take out condors. There was an issue with the mountain lion, and I believe we've also had one die from golden eagles before. But again, luckily, it's not too big of a problem compared to lead poisoning. That's kind of our main focus for where the threat is to these birds. So, and also just as a note, this is for the whole population, not just Southern California. So just kind of a heads up on the numbers there.
And I think it's also kind of poignant when you look at this slide that predation, which is more of a natural cause of death for condors, is actually greater than all of the other deaths that are on there, but except for lead poisoning, which is just radically different. So, you know, if you were to really take lead poisoning out of the equation, the next highest factor, which, you know, really isn't impacting the population in a very, very significant, you know, way like lead poisoning is, you know, it just kind of highlights how important it is to get that lead off the landscape. And, you know, there's predation that condors face at all ages. Eggs are vulnerable to ravens as well. Chicks can be predated by bears or anything that can climb up into wherever their nest cavity is. So yeah, predation can come in all ranges, but they're a pretty large bird, and so predation, you know, isn't really the highest focus for those field biologists.
Okay, the next question is, how many condors are there right now in Southern California, and also how many nests?
Cool. Yeah, so right now in Southern California, we have 97 birds out there. There is one bird that had dropped its GPS and therefore tag, and so there's like a flexibility of we might be double counting one bird. So we're kind of waiting for some blood results to come back to confirm that one right now. But otherwise, total this year, what was it, 3, 4, 5, 6? We've had, I think, 8 total this year. Right now, there's 3 nests, I believe. One of them is a little bit unsure. So it's been kind of a challenging year for us because normally we can get out there and we can confirm these nests a little bit easier. But with the whole COVID situation, we've kind of had to, you know, limit our time out in the field and kind of if we had everybody out there all driving the vehicles and touching everything, it'd be kind of an issue. So yeah, we've been trying to do our monitoring via GPS, which luckily, you know, the birds, most of the breeders have a GPS, so that's been super helpful. But yeah, it's been a challenging year for sure.
Okay, the next question is, what are some suggestions for how best to spot a condor in the wild? For instance, if passing through Bitter Creek Refuge, what would one do to have a reasonable chance to spot a condor, or would it just be luck?
Most of the time, It is kind of luck, you know, and just good timing. Obviously, there's going to be good places to see condors, and right near the Condor refuges is definitely a good place. So if you're driving on Hudson Branch Road near the Bitter Creek National Wildlife Refuge, although the wildlife refuges are closed to the public, in general, not just due to COVID, there's a sign that says Bitter Creek National Wildlife Refuge. There's two signs, but the one that's southernmost on Hudson Ranch Road is a really nice spot. You can pull off to the side, just grab your binoculars and just check them out. There's also a condor observation area at the Doe Flat trailhead, but really all along that road is a good place. If you find yourself along the Big Sur coastline, there's been many condor sightings there. So that's also a good place to check them out. And it's also a pretty beautiful backdrop to see some condors.
I'm going to jump in on this one too. The Friends group, when things are more open, right now with COVID, we've canceled all of our events that bring people together. But normally we have a viewing booth on first and third Saturdays, June through September, outside of Bitter Creek. And that information is on the activities tab of our webpage. We also usually lead tours onto the refuges, and our tours have had really great success on seeing condors in the wild. And we've been lucky enough, because we coordinate with Fish and Wildlife for those tours, there's certain sites where you can see nests from a distance, for example, and we've been able to set up scopes and tripods and let people view nests on tours. So again, you know, we aren't running them right now, but that's something that I would keep an eye out for on our website to see upcoming events. The next question.
Helen, can I chime in real quick too? I was going to mention also, if you can't get out to any of these places and see them, Ventana Wildlife Society, I'll actually type it into the chat. They're streaming a live nest cam this year up in the Big Sur area. So you can go to their website and see condors just about whenever you want from your computer, if you can't get out to any of these places right now. So awesome.
The next question, is there a volunteer program working with the condors?
I'm not sure if you guys want to talk at all about other volunteering. As far as working with the condors, we don't necessarily have one to directly work with the birds, but I know the Friends group runs some really great volunteer opportunities out on the refuge, which is awesome when we have folks come out and help like that. So yeah, we do also have, for folks who are kind of interested in that sort of a career path, we have an internship program through the Great Basin Institute. And it's always really cool. You know, we have these young biologists come in and they're just kind of getting started in their careers, and they come out and work with us for about 6 months on the Condor program. Yeah, and it's really cool to see folks kind of pledge, so to speak, as they kind of move up through their careers.
Yeah. The Friends group has a volunteer program. Again, it's not running right now because of the COVID pandemic, but we normally every 4th Saturday of the month do a work day on a refuge, and you don't work with condors at all. You know, generally it's something that, you know, many hands make light work kind of work. It can be anything from removing fence to, doing, helping with bird survey work, or, kind of anything in between. We have groups come and help us. And it's really nice because you spend a couple hours on the refuge, you have your lunch on the refuge, you might do a little bit of work after lunch, and it gives a great opportunity to help out the wildlife refuges that help in condors, but also to be in a place where you're likely to see condors, more so than our roadside kiosk, which is outside of the refuge. And it's something that you can do more regularly than you can attend tours, because the tours are pretty limited attendance.
And I'll just plug in one last volunteer opportunity, which is through zoos. And there are several zoos that house California condors, as Daniel mentioned. Santa Barbara Zoo is one of them, and we do accept keeper aids. I actually started off as a keeper aid with the Santa Barbara Zoo, grabbing little carcasses and little remnants that the condors like to leave in the trees, and that was my way of helping to help out. So many zoos have different types of volunteer programs, including docent programs that allow you to be a part of the whole program or program as a whole. So you can go ahead and check those out. Again, with the caveat that with the COVID pandemic, many institutions are limiting what kind of volunteers they can take right now. But if you show interest now, then very likely you'll be at the top of the list later.
And actually, there's I'm blanking. Condor, the Zooniverse program, Condor Watch online.
That is currently stopped at the moment, but there are many fantastic Zooniverse, citizen science Zooniverse projects that are up and coming, and Zooniverse has gotten such wonderful participation due to this pandemic because of the ability for people to be able to do citizen science remotely, and definitely encourage you to check that out. Condor's Watch was a part of it, and I don't know that it will be again, but that's not to say that we couldn't use Zooniverse for some sort of citizen science project in the future.
Fabulous, thank you. The next question is, once a condor has fed, does it rest for a while before soaring again or returning to feed offspring, or does it digest on the wing?
I think it kind of depends on the bird and its situation. So you have some birds who are out there and they might feed and they don't really have to go anywhere, so they'll just kind of hang around with the other birds, but there are other birds who maybe they have a chick, so they'll fly out, go feed, and then fly off to feed their chick, like they got business to do. So it really could be either one.
Okay, do condors stay on top of the SoCal mountains even during snowstorms or winter?
Yeah, they stick around even if it's snowing. I've definitely been around looking at some birds that looked pretty miserable in the snow, but they stick around. That's their territory. So,
and it's also important or poignant, I guess, to kind of remember back to what Daniel said about Lewis and Clark finding condors up in Washington and the Columbia, and thinking about where their range actually was in the Pleistocene. And tell you what, it's a lot cooler up there than it is down here in Southern California. So even though you see that bare, bald head that the condors have, they have this really nice adaptation where you see that beautiful ruff of feathers, kind of like this, 1920s boa around their necks, and they can actually fluff that up to help insulate them against the cold. And man, these guys are troopers when it comes to 115-degree weather to near zero. They can survive. They outlasted saber-tooth. They outlasted mammoths, giant sloths. They're here. They're here.
You can see the ruff really well on the condor in your background, Nadia.
Yeah.
Just right behind your head, you can see there's like a wonderful ruff right up to the back of the head of the condor. The next question is, can you see condors in the Grand Canyon?
Yes, you can. So the Grand Canyon is one of the places where you can see condors. Kind of like Daniel had mentioned, there's a few different populations, and one of the populations is out in the Grand Canyon. So. Oh, Helen, you're still on mute.
Apologize. I'm trying to mute when other people are talking so that there's not sound overlap. There's some really good places in the Grand Canyon area as well, like Navajo Bridge near Page, that people get stunning shots of condors flying over the Colorado.
I'd say if you want more information about the flock around the Grand Canyon and Zion, the Arizona-Utah flock, you can look up the Peregrine Fund. They manage that, or help manage that flock out there.
Another question, are there any efforts to make lead ammunition illegal?
Yeah, so there is a lead ban in California. It came into effect in different stages, so it didn't fully go into effect until I believe July of last year. So it's kind of been, a slow process of getting there. but that's also just in California, so it's not everywhere. And there's also, you know, like the way of just banning lead, that's one approach, but there's also other approaches of just doing outreach and working with people to have the, you know, change their habits and use non-lead ammunition instead. So it doesn't have to be something that where you just go out there and there's a law and that's how we're going to fix it. There's definitely multiple approaches to that solution.
The next one's not exactly a question, but someone had a discussion with a friend who's a hunter a few years ago who insisted non-lead bullets were no good. I really don't know if he was right, but wondering if the bullets have been improved in recent years. I'd like to convince him now to use them.
Yes, and actually that's a really good point to bring up, Helen, because the non-lead technology has transformed amazingly in the last several years, mostly because all this information is coming out to say, hey, you know what, this actually is a problem, and it's kind of pushed this really fantastic technological innovation. And so many people are absolutely right. You know, the non-lead technology when it first came out wasn't that great, but you know, we look at the bricks of what cell phones used to be and where they are now, and you know, you can see technological progression, which is why really the people to talk to are the ones that are on top of it. It's Chad Thomas and Mike Stake in that slide that Daniel had. These guys are the ones to talk to because they are on top of the most current information of non-lead out there. And I've got to tell you, you know, it's kind of amazing to hear these updates and where the non-lead technology is at, because they're working not only on non-lead as a whole, but each different ammunition type, so that all guns, all rounds are covered. And I believe, and Molly can correct me if I'm wrong, that there is a quality substitute for every type of bullet out there. And comparable in price too, which is always a question that we get.
Yeah, it's come a really long way. Okay, the next question is, are there any efforts to return condors to Florida? There are no mountains in Florida, so where did they nest previously?
You know, I was just looking at the map thinking that exact same question of why were the condors in Florida? I have no idea, to be honest. I wish I was alive back then to give a better answer. But there's no current efforts to reintroduce them to Florida at the moment. We're still kind of working on getting a good population here in California. So that's our main focus. But that is a really good question, because these birds, they really rely on that orographic lift from the mountains and having those cavities. So this is, I don't know, that Florida one, that stumps me every time. I don't know.
It's also important to note that, you know, that is the population range from the Pleistocene epoch, and those technically, while they were ancestors of the current California condor species, they weren't actually the California condor that we have today. So the landscape that we have nowadays may have been good for the ancestors of the California condor, but they may not be appropriate for the California condor that we have today. A lot of this is historical data. I know that there was actually remains found in New York, and so there's a lot of question whether condors were actually in New York at some point. But again, big old question mark on that one. So I think bringing it kind of into perspective, looking at the California condor that we have today, what it needs on the landscape that's available today, really informs those management decisions.
Thank you. The next question is, we observed condors at Pinnacles National Park. Which population group are they part of?
So the ones up in Pinnacles, which, by the way, that's a really cool spot to go see condors too, for sure. What a great area, Pinnacles. But that's part of the Central California flock. So it's pretty much one big flock that mixes between kind of the Big Sur area and Pinnacles area. They'll go back and forth pretty much. So we consider them one population.
The next question is, can any of you tell us if Condor Chick 980 from Pole Canyon has been seen since the camera was turned off last fall.
Sure. Yeah, so that bird, which I'm pretty sure that's the one behind me here, just resting with his legs out, super cute. So that bird's just kind of been sticking around the hopper area. Kind of as young birds, they don't fly super far. They're still kind of figuring out like, okay, this is how I can fly really well and soar and control where I'm going. But they tend to stick around their kind of native territories for a while. I think last month we had a light hawk flight go out, take signals for us. And we got a signal for that bird just north of the hopper area.
Thank you. Okay, next, which area in Big Sur is a good place to see condors?
I think, I know I haven't been up there recently. I might not be the best expert for this one, but pretty much anywhere along the coast, like as you're driving up and down, I think you can see condors kind of all along that area. I don't know if anybody else has.
I've been told by people to just keep an eye out for folks pulled over with binoculars because trying to scan for the condors is sometimes, you know, not the best idea when you're driving on Route 1, but that it's often really obvious because other people, you know, will be stopped at various points. I've also been told that near Julia Pfeiffer Burns State Park is kind of a good stretch, and that there's a number of pull-offs, you know, like on the water side that you can park up in and scan around. And the last thing is, I do know that the Ventana Wildlife Society does tours. Theirs aren't free. They're like, you know, you pay and you know, your little group gets a paid tour and they bring you around. And those are a great way to see the Big Sur population, and it supports their, you know, release and biology work.
Yeah, and just below the Big Sur kind of city, right above the Julia Pfeiffer State Park, there's actually some pretty cool pullouts. There's one pullout that has a condor in, you know, just on the ground with this really cool mosaic. And just like Helen said, if you see people stopped, that's probably what they're looking at. And there's also obviously some really great views along the way.
Yeah. About how many captive raised birds are released each year?
I think that depends a little bit, varying from year to year. I think it's somewhere, you know, for all of the different release sites, I think it's somewhere around 15 to 20 or so. But again, it definitely varies from year to year. Sometimes they have more eggs and chicks in captivity, and some years it's a little bit less. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Okay. Someone has asked for us to email to include a link to the Friends of Volunteer on-site work group program, and I will do that. I will include a link with the email. Could someone talk a little more about the clever chick rearing techniques that have been used in captive breeding? This person used to work at the Manchester Zoo in England, and they had Andean condors and used the technique of taking the first laid eggs and hand rearing the resulting chicks. So yeah, can you talk a little bit more about the captive rearing techniques?
Yeah, and really the captive program has been such an integral part into the success of the California condor. California condors are case-selected species. They do mature late. They lay an egg roughly every other year. So without the captive program, the population wouldn't be nearly as high as it is. And part of that is they found that condors double and sometimes even triple clutch. So when a condor lays, or when any bird lays a clutch, it's just the number of eggs that they lay at that particular time. Condors lay one egg. If they lose an egg early on in the season, whether natural or unnatural causes, they can, or they have the ability to lay a second or sometimes even a third egg. So this was actually noted by biologists in the wild, and the captive program tried this and were successful at it. So some of the innovative techniques that they've been able to use to kind of capitalize on this is they've taken eggs and, you know, they
incubate them in an incubator. And initially they started puppet rearing, but then they found that as the population increased, there were pairs that, you know, didn't lay an egg, but had the ability to foster these chicks. And so that was kind of the first step, is basically doubling the amount of eggs, or even tripling the amount of eggs in some cases, and giving them to these parents that didn't have a chick themselves, or maybe laid an infertile egg, and allowing them to rear that chick, and again increasing that population. In the LA Zoo just a few years ago, a couple of the keepers wanted to see what it would look like if a parent in a captive setting were able to essentially rear 2 chicks. Now, in the wild, that's not exactly feasible because of the resources that it takes to just put into 1 chick, namely getting enough food and also being able to incubate an egg. The reason that condors lay 1 egg is it needs to be incubated, it needs to be kept at a certain temperature, and because condors switch out in order to get enough food for themselves and then eventually their chick, they aren't able to successfully incubate 2 eggs at one time. It just poses a big threat to those 2 eggs. But in captivity, you have additional resources to make sure that doesn't happen. You also have the resources to be able to provide enough food for the adult as well as the chicks. And so because the keeper staff among all of our captive institutions is just so awesome and so fantastic. You don't even know. They dedicate their lives to understanding the condor. They tried this and were successful at being able to utilize the relationship that they had with certain condors, understanding their amazing rearing techniques, and were able to provide them with 2 chicks to be able to rear, which is kind of a game changer when you talk about the upper limit of chicks that you're able to have in your facility in the eventual hope that you get them out into the wild.
Thank you. The next question is, what is the status of the program to reintroduce condors to either the Northern California or Southern Oregon?
Yeah, I think they just wrapped up the NEPA process, but there are plans currently to reintroduce condors up there. Definitely, it hasn't happened yet. I think they're still they're in the process of making sure they have adequate facilities up there, and making sure everything is good to go, because you don't want to just, you know, okay, here we're going to release some condors, everything's going to be fine. You know, it takes a lot of tracking those birds, and having the resources and the people to make sure that the program is successful.
Fabulous. Any news on Chick 1000 in Zion?
Yeah, I think they ended up trapping that bird about a month ago, I think it was, or not, maybe even more recent than that. But they did just trap that bird and they gave it a health checkup, seemed like it was doing good. They gave it its tag, it's a little 1K, which is pretty cute. And then they also took a blood sample, so hopefully they'll be able to find out soon whether that one's a male or a female. So, but it sounds like that chick is doing great.
Wonderful. Are condors often seen in Pinnacles National Park?
Yeah, actually, Pinnacles really is a great spot to view condors. We've gone up there to work in collaboration with our partners up at the National Park Service up in Pinnacles. And, you know, they even have little viewing stands just right in the campground. And I know every time I've been up there to go camping, I've regularly seen condors soaring over the hills over there. So not only is it a beautiful place just to visit, it's actually a pretty good place to go see condors as well.
Excellent. This isn't a question, but I'm going to read it anyway. As far as I'm concerned, all y'all who work with condors are rock stars. What an amazing recovery effort. So people are appreciating your work. That's the last question that had come in. So I encourage, if anybody else has any questions, let us know, but otherwise I think that we'll wind down. And thank you so much, everybody, for coming.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. And thanks to you, Helen and Daniel, for doing the presentation, and Nadia for helping me answer these questions. So just thanks everybody for being here.
Yeah, I echo Molly's sentiment. Thank you so much. I mean, wow, I think at the most we had, over 60 people here, and to be that interested when so much else is going on in the world and being excited about condors, this is partly why we're here, is, to recognize how important condors are to our community. So thank you so much for showing that what we're doing is working, at least on the community side. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Keep sharing the love and sharing the message. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you all so much.